Welcome everybody to this evening's virtual glass of wine with the very well-known right now, very well-respected Michelle. Is it Tesoro or how?
Tesoro.
Who has got an AC Eddie Award and a Primetime Eddie Award for The Queen's Gambit, and I'm sure we're getting many more rewards for the wonderful film of Maestro, telling the story of Leonard Bernstein's life, which is just being released right now. Catch it in the cinemas, and I believe it's going to be on Netflix by the end of the year for anyone who wants to watch it a second time. I know I do. So, Michelle, firstly, I believe you don't have a literal glass of wine.
I tried to raid the minibar in this hotel room, and unfortunately, for the first time, there was nothing in the minibar. It's like they've turned the refrigerator into this, store at a hotel, and no, there was unfortunately nothing in there.
Well, should we do a cheers anyway? Cheers on your premiere, and thank you so much for coming, and doing this chat with us. The usual place to start is where you started into editing. What was your route in to get to this where you are now as a film and leading drama editor? Could you give us any sort of a picture of that?
That's a long road, Ben.
We're going to bridge it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I started out in high school, like being interested in theater and photography, and I didn't, I watched a lot of movies. I missed a lot of class in order to go see, like, for example, I remember I cut school to go see Hamlet, Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, with the intermission. And I was a movie buff, and I ended up in a circuitous way going to NYU Film School, Tisch School of the Arts, where I got to study all the disciplines before I landed on editing.
Very cool.
Yes.
I think I read on Wikipedia that which I'm not certain if it's right because it's Wikipedia, but that you worked at a record store in New York after sort of doing.
No, I worked at, it wasn't a record store. It's a music publishing company called Abco Music and Records. And what they do is they own the publishing rights and some of the masters to some of the Rolling Stones from 1964 to 1971, and Sam Cooke library, and some of the Cameo Parkway, 60s and 50s and 70s music. So that's what my first job was out of college. And, I did a lot of music promo cutting, like every time they would reissue a new 40 licks from Rolling Stones or something like that, like they would put out a little promo and I would get to put that together. Or when they would reissue the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus DVD, we put out some DVD extras. Do you remember those DVD extras where there would be extra clips, outtakes? I think for the one that I did in 2003, that DVD, I got to cut some Taj Mahal performances that hadn't been cut for the actual film of Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. So that was a lot of fun. And we also did a restoration of the film, and I learned a lot about just cutting with music, cutting with performance at that job.
I was wondering about your sort of relationship to music and audio, because obviously Maestro being about Leonard Bernstein, who's not only such a respected conductor and composer, but also his music was not the simplest, in terms of sort of time signatures and genres, and that made me wonder about what drew you to Maestro and the challenges there within. Could you give us any picture of how it's all started, and we'll maybe move on to the other bits a bit later. Who called who? How you got involved in the project?
Well, so I was, after I had finished the Queen's Gambit, the producer on the Queen's Gambit was Bill Horberg. and he was also producing Sean Penn's independent film Flag Day. And because of COVID and all sorts of stuff, his editor Valdis had gone back home to Iceland, and they were looking to try to reopen the film because their film had gone at a bit of a standstill. And so I came in, and Sean and I worked, and he's very good friends with Bradley. And I guess, I don't know, they were screening when I was finished with the movie. They screened the movie, and Bradley was at the screening and asked about who edited the last pass of the film, because he had actually seen many versions of the film and had given Sean a lot of notes, because the guy loves being in the editing room. I don't know, what can I say? He loves editing. That's the first thing he told me when we spoke. But from that screening, he called me and said, hey, I'm developing this project, and I have a lot of test footage, and just wondered if you wanted to kind of play with me and play with this footage, and just to see what it might be like. And that's the only thing that he was sort of offering at the moment. So I worked on that project, what we ended up calling the proof of concept. They initially said it was a sizzle reel, but I was like, I don't know, it's not sizzling, and it's not a trailer or anything like that. But it was really interesting because they had done all these makeup tests, and I mean, it was maybe 5 years of testing different looks and different at different eras of Bernstein, and also looks for camera. Like, they tested aspect ratios, film versus video, black and white versus color, in various different places, Disney Hall, and in and around Hollywood. So there was a lot to kind of play with. And then as well, in the script, there were a lot of references to actual interviews. And so I just kind of went online and found them and started using them within this proof of concept, just to get this idea of how things would play. And we decided, he asked me to do the movie after doing that, and then and that was that.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, thanks for talking through that. Onto the subject of the music element of it. I mean, looking back at the Queen's Gambit, looking back at Godless, I see you seem really strong with your audio, through your transitions and the way you used it. And then you've taken on a whole different level with Maestro. Do you have any background sort of as a musician, or what's your understanding of music which maybe drew you to this film?
There's so many things that draw me to the film, but I think, yes, I do have a background in music. I mean, I find that a lot of people in editing and in post have this musical background. But I grew up, I played the piano, I played the flute, the last instrument I played was the cello. I played that the longest, and studied for that further. So there was a point when I got out of cello, I got back into cello, and that was after I started editing again, in the beginning, back in 2011. And it was really interesting to me because my teacher is like a jazz improv cellist. And we would really take a deep dive into music and rhythms and different ways to play different rhythms. And I mean, I'm not a great, cellist or anything, but it really helped me in finding other rhythms and other meters in my picture editing, so, because I think, especially when you're editing with music, it's sort of, you're drawn to doing the things on 1 and 3 and stuff, the downbeat. And then you kind of graduate to, well, maybe I can cut on an upbeat, or then maybe I can further subdivide and find another beat in between that will still feel like it's in rhythm with something, but not feel like it's off, because we all have this thing where we're cutting and it's like, we want to cut there, so it's, instead of cutting on it down, like, can we do the pickup and can we do somewhere else and still make it feel like special?
Oh, that's a fantastic answer. And you said there was other things which drew you to Maestro as well as the musical side. Would you be able to
Well,
tell us a bit more about?
yeah, I mean, just, working on this story, and working about, I think somebody had asked me this like a couple of years ago, like after the Queen's Gambit. They're like, oh, are you drawn to these stories of people who've had to struggle, who are geniuses that have to go through some struggle to get through? I was like, oh gosh, this is yet another one of these stories about the about genius, about someone, and see, now I'm forgetting the phrase, but the challenge of genius, and I was just drawn to that. And obviously he's an iconic person and his music is iconic. My mom was a very big fan. I knew of him. We had records of his, I think we had the record of Beethoven's Ninth that he did. And also, I mean, when Bradley was telling me about the story, he said, so what would you think if the movie wasn't like a biography? Like, I was thinking, maybe this would be a love story and we could focus on their relationship. And that idea really interested me, because the problem with trying to tell, a biography, especially with someone as prolific as Bernstein, is there's never enough time to really deep dive into their life and really feel like you're getting something out of it. And it's a lot better to try to follow one thread of a person so that you can sort of feel them and get to know them. And in this intimate way, I felt like this was also something that people could probably relate to on some level.
How did you find working in the different types of film, like the black and white and the colour? And you said there was a number of test shoots which brought in different elements. How did you find, did that affect your editing at all? Did that affect your decision making on Maestro?
It did. And, I mean, this is more about, I think Bradley, had more of a choice with this because he, when we started with the proof of concept, we were working with, two aspect ratios, like 2:4 and 1:8:5 and 1:3:3, and we were just sort of mixing it all together. I mean, what we did find is, if the footage was compelling and sort of had elements of being matched, like graphically inside, like it didn't really, it wasn't too distracting. But I think eventually, and I don't know what other decisions he may have made from that, but he really took to the 1:3:3 aspect ratio as a way to show within the frame depth. It was because he felt the story was more foreground and background driven, and the layers in between versus separation of this of in the wide. And then I think when we were editing, because and then he also used like the 1:3:3 aspect ratio to sort of represent time periods. So like he felt like we used it a lot for the 40s and the 70s, part of the 70s. And then when we jumped to the 80s and Bernstein's later years, we're in a 1:8:5 aspect ratio. So once we only had the two aspect ratios, it was, and I think we tried to maybe intercut. You really couldn't just randomly intercut it. Like, it felt like it really stuck out. And so when we did it, we really had to, which ultimately was the bookend of the film. We bookended it 1:8:5 with 1:8:5. We felt like, okay, well, it's a purpose because it represents the time. and we're kind of bookending it. But also when we transition to one or the other, it has to be very simple, as if it just happens and you don't know it's happening.
You mentioned then about the different perspectives, that there was quite a lot of it in the broad, and that there was also other spectrum within it. I sensed other elements in there. Was there anything you can contribute, sort of down to your influence? You know, you hear just with editors. Is there anything you can think that you put in there? You know, that you feel particularly proud of, or anything like that?
I mean, I don't know. This was like a project that I worked so closely with Bradley. I'm like looking at the film now, and it's hard for me to find, it's very rare for me to find something that we both didn't touch together, you know, or decide on together. So that's one. I mean, I would say probably Fancy Free on the Town, the dance, about the ballet musical sequence. A lot of that, you know, we stuck with what the assembly was, and we made changes like here and there, you know, different performances or wanting to be somewhere else, but, you know, during the solo sailor part. But most of it was pretty much, I mean, I just loved cutting that piece because it's so fun to cut dance, and he directed it so like surgically that really, and I mean, the dancers were amazing. There was obviously nothing to fix or anything like that, but you know, I decided to do this thing different, where I made these super stacks or super groups, where I just like stacked every setup, like, and we just sunk it to the playback, and then made like a huge group clip. Like this group clip like took forever to load, but once it was loaded and you cut it in to the sequence, and you would just add an edit and just switch the camera, it was so easy. Like I never had to go back to I never had to go back to the what's it called, to the bin, really. I would just like switch it every time. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Then back onto audio, because that's the you know, such a prevalent thing in this film, along with the picture variations. Can you tell us anything about your approach to working with the sound designers, you know, and all the other people involved in the audio on this, and how you work with what they gave you when it came to putting it onto the timeline as well, if there's any insight you could give into that?
Yeah, so the person that I worked mostly with for this project in the beginning, that wasn't a part of picture editorial, was the music editor, who is credited as executive music producer, Jason Reuter. You know, he was the one who started with finding the rights for all the music, but he would set up all the playback, you know, on set, and then he would have all the tracks working with Bradley as to what pieces of Bernstein's work we could use, and obviously would need to be licensed. But you know, every time, you know, there was always like a working bin of the titles that were in the let's try to use these, or these are going to be scripted, and here's our track that Bradley approved of it, because he'd often have to like edit it in a way so that they can use it on set. But I worked with him just in the beginning, just getting the plain tracks, you know, the 2 tracks from the original recordings, and being able to spot them and put them in the movie during the assembly. And then once Bradley and I started cutting the music, or cutting the picture, and we needed maybe a little bit of a different music edit, or just we needed a better sounding track, we would kick the picture back to Jason, and he'd work on it with Bradley's notes, and then we would get that back. And I think I was working in stereo for most of the picture until we went to our first preview mix, and then from then on I would use stems, you know, LCR stems in the tracks.
Yeah, I said earlier about how sort of Godless and Queen's Gambit were so involving. I just couldn't move myself from the seat. And do you have an awareness of, you know, it's obviously the same in Maestro, but do you have an awareness that you're doing that? You know, do you see links to like a thriller to Hitchcock or anything like that?
I'm very flattered. You know, I mean, I'm not really even aware sometimes. I think I just, you know, we're so involved in when we cut, like, oh, where is the best place? Because in my mind, how would I like this scene to play out in my mind, you know, and I try to put that there. And then when I'm working with the director, it's like we're really talking about how, you know, what we're trying to do. And you know, it's funny because I notice that when I look at my work and I know that what we're doing, everything we can to evoke emotion or some sort of feeling, and I can watch it and everyone else in the room might be crying or getting very emotional, and I just nothing. And I actually need to step out of it. And it was funny when I did this master class in Copenhagen. the the moderator decided to take clips from a lot of projects that I've done in the past, and some of these I haven't watched in years, you know, so I have that proper separation. And he played this one clip from On the Basis of Sex, you know, and I know logically he told me he was going to play it, and so I knew what it was, but I just watching it at that time, I was like, I got so emotional. I really surprised myself, and I'd like to think that, oh, this is what people experience. You know, but I'm really not aware of it until I can step away, because, you know, essentially I'm like the builder of a house. It's like I don't know what it looks like, but you guys are standing on across the street looking at the house, you know.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, in terms of being a tearjerker as well, then you're every time. So that's another talent you've got there. So can we have any? If anyone's got any other questions, if they could put it in chat, and we'll move on to that soon. If anyone's got anything they'd like to hear from Michelle. What else have I got? In another interview, I saw you mention about that you see a lot of your audio as like dialogue, as conversations or your scenes. Could you tell us a bit more about that and how or if it featured in Maestro, that sort of philosophy on cutting?
I mean, I don't know when I said that, but I feel like it's more about like the dialogue, the sound, and any effects as more like music. I think now I view it as music, because even when I worked on Newsroom, which was an Aaron Sorkin joint, you know, his dialogue, he really likes the performance to be very musical. There's a little bit of a triplet, you know, and everyone's overlapping and it lands, and it was kind of similar. Well, it's similar in many things now that I think about it that way. And I think in Maestro, we had the music to play with, but a lot of their dialogue is also quite musical. And I think because, you know, Bradley is very musical and he's in the scenes and he's directing it that way, they had a kind of musicality already in it, you know. And I also, and, you know, not to say, you know, the other people who were great were the camera operators, who just always seemed to know where to be and how to land somewhere. Like, you know, so you just kind of, you know, when I'm cutting, you want there to also be the rhythm within the shot and the performance, and then trying to fit yourself in between there and not get in the way. But you know, it's fun to be able to cut it, because oftentimes we would cut it without music, and then we put the music, you know, when we're first building a scene, and then we would, you know, apply music if music wasn't there before or wasn't a part of the scene. And sometimes it would just land beautifully like that, because it in and of itself is already that kind of rhythm, of a rhythm.
And another thing which interested me was the subject of gender. Obviously, with Maestro being about Bernstein, but then his wife playing such a big part in it, and then going back into your other works, you know, as I mentioned so many times before, into Queen's Gambit and Godless, that they were obviously had a lot to do with strong female characters. How do you have particular sort of views? Is that a cause that you're particularly interested in?
I'm interested in it. I don't know if it sometimes chooses me. You know, I kind of think that that's the case. I mean, you know, with Godless and Queen's Gambit, and like, I kind of make fun of Scott sometimes because, you know, he's a twin and he's a fraternal twin. His twin is a female, and his sister's very small like me, and he's not small, he's tall. And I always make fun. I was like, oh, well, you took up the whole womb and stuff and you got all the nutrients. But I was like, maybe you feel guilty about that, and so you surround yourself with strong women, you know. But like he writes, just he always has these type of characters like in his thing. But you know, I think Bradley, you know, really was really interested in it, in their marriage, and how their love worked for each of them. So I mean, to me, like, I find it always interesting. I mean, I don't think I consciously pick these things. It just happens to come my way, and I'm happy to tell that story, you know.
How did you work? Bobby Purton wants to know, how did you work on restructuring Queen's Gambit? Was it in collaboration with the director, or did you come up with a suggestion first?
I think with those, because in that series, the director was the writer. And I think we did talk a lot about like some, you know, we had a particular some particular structural issues in like episode 2 and 3. Like there was maybe 3 episodes that actually we turned into 4, and there was some around the tournament in Ohio that he kind of shot in different ways because the costuming wasn't like working. And I was like, this isn't how it is in the script. Do you just want me to do whatever? He goes, yeah, do whatever. So just fix it. And I was like, okay. So yeah, I did a lot of those, and just showed him, and knew he'd correct me, but it's been so long, I don't remember specifically.
Another one, how long did the editing process take on Maestro, and how do you keep some sort of freshness in viewing all of the footage, all of the dailies throughout this process?
Gosh, this is one of these things I realize why feature film editing is, how it differs from when I'm working on like a television series or something of a shorter format, is your ability to look at it fresh every time. And that's just really hard. I mean, I just told you, like, I don't often sometimes get emotional. So you always have to remember the first feeling and take note of it. Just so because you're not going to feel like, I'm not going to feel that way the same way after I've looked at this thing like 100 times, you know, in a week. So, I mean, I think what helps is is having the open cutting room, and Bradley was really open. Like, we would always joke that basically everyone in Hollywood has seen the movie before we got finished. But like, he would really be open to people watching and giving their feedback. And like, really, for me, that's essential to be able to, you know, obviously we'd like to show people who, you know, we respect their opinion, and they're really smart, and you know, and just know that they have a little bit of a fresh perspective, and to use that to our advantage. But yeah, it is really hard. But a lot of it for me, especially after you've seen it so many times, it's just about having an open heart, you know, and allowing these other viewpoints to sort of make you question it over and over and over again, what you've done.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question from Spencer, which also links in with the earlier question from Eric. Did you have to kill any darlings while editing Maestro?
Oh, many darlings too.
Yeah, and Eric asked, what if you didn't like Bradley's performance, which I thought.
Oh, right.
With that,
Well, you know, I don't think there was a time where I didn't like Bradley's performance. So luckily that did not come up. And like when it comes to performance, I knew that I could just lean on him because he knew what he wanted and he knew what it was going to be. So and that wasn't going to really be a huge part of my job, is fixing performances, because there's nothing to fix with these people. Like they're all great, you know, and if there was anything that wasn't like in line with the story that he wanted to tweak, like I could lean on him. And what was the other? Oh, killing darlings. So yeah, we had a lot. I mean, there were things that, you know, so I think our first assembly might have been like 3 hours long, like the first director's assembly that had kind of everything in it. You know, some things we kept, but in a shorter form. You know, we had to get rid of this one sequence that was basically Lenny based at the beginning of his career. And it was a 7-minute long scene. And it also, we had it at the beginning of the film, and we were struggling in the beginning to enforce the idea that this movie was about the two of them and not a biography of Leonard Bernstein. So because this one scene focused just a little bit too much on him, we had to pull it out. But it's a fun scene, and it's a great scene in Carnegie Hall, and you know, so.
Emily says, an amazing film, and she's already booked to see it again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it really, really changes your perspective on things. And
like
awesome insight from Niven. And do you have any, good one, Spencer, do you have any advice for aspiring film editors?
Oh boy. I don't know. You know, we're coming into a weird time of like, we're questioning the role of AI in the future of our craft. And it's hard to say what the future will hold. I mean, I think I would just aspire to think big on your role as the editor, and that it is a creative position, and it's not necessarily about all the tricky little things you can do with the tool. It's always about being a storyteller and being a partner in telling a greater story, and creating a piece of work that pushes the medium, you know, that maybe not, that isn't what is already out there. Like it's still in art form. So think about it as an art form.
I think that's a perfect place for us to end. And I think everyone here will agree that you definitely are an artist in what you create. And just, does everybody want to unmute, and we'll give a round of applause and a thanks for an incredible virtual glass of wine.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much fun.
Thanks.